Who knew the afterlife was a culmination of arcade games? Death Parade wasn't 2015's biggest show, you could probably attribute that to a certain capability, but it was possibly the most memorable for its distinct tonal whiplash. After a decade following its airing, Death Parade remains to being a conscious example of what it means to hook an audience in on one premise, only to leave them stranded with a 180-degree story shift and keep their attention all the way through. So, how does the deadly game of destiny keep you for another round? Well, it plays its hand quite smoothly. In the game parlor arrives various people of different walks of life, where they're met with the expressionless bartender Deckham. Many of these people don't know where or who they are, nor why they're there, to which Deckham introduces some sort of game to them to jog their memory. But as it turns out, this is actually the afterlife, and is over the course of the preceding contest to which determines where these late souls are headed, upward or downward. One such soul is a particularly amnesiac woman who arrives solo. She's assigned to work as Deckham's assistant in order to discover her own identity and why she's there. In this afterlife where a roll of the dice could literally decide your ultimate fate, it always comes down to the simple question, are you game? I think the fame of Death Parade's story has made today's audience aware of its situation, so let's actually start from when it first aired. Among the initial scenes you see of the show are a couple entering the Quindecum, followed by the jazzy, funky, colorful noise of the opening by the band BRADIO. In the nature of first impressions, many, including yours truly, thought this would be a show of partying with a bunch of classic games with a ragtag group of pals. This delusion would soon be shattered as a tale of death, misery, and confronting the sins of loved ones bears its fangs. So right off the bat, with your expectations shifted, the show manages to tie into its own themes of twisting developments to its narrative advantage, and despite you being aware of its formula, you can't look away. The stories that follow in this episodic show are deep think pieces that drive out surprisingly rich character from people who sometimes seem one note or even interesting yet incomplete. Well, this formula completes their story, as you, the audience, weigh the sins and virtues of these souls alongside the bartenders. Deckham himself is an odd guy. First and foremost, I really like his design. It's really nonchalant, yet impressionable in that man who knows all kind of way. You really see him as a bystander who doesn't interfere not for keeping his peace, but rather to maintain the brevity of the process to follow. He can be cool, he can be chilling, he can be nothing. He manages to do a lot with little because he's a pointed character of judgment and rules, and it's through his authority that leads the patrons to their conclusions. Similarly, the other mainstays matches level some ways. His superior is a mischievous type akin to Loki. The amnesiac woman's story picks up some subtle and depressing details over the show's run, and all else range from goofy to insane, but still within that ballpark of the bartender role of maintaining order in the afterlife. With all of that in mind, with the death and despair looming, you'd think it's a pretty downer show. And it kind of is, but in a twisted way, it's also really fun in that aspect. For as morbid as the themes are, they're relayed in creative outlets through the games and told in poignant dialogue pieces. The atmosphere and the animation also do wonders for telling these tales in well-felt and well-shot bits. They've mastered the contained space of this bar, making the uncomfortable close-ups suffocating and the empty wide shots nauseating. It makes the silence stew much better as the characters play these games of torture. But what makes Death Parade really stand out, aside from its awesome opening, colorful cast and dark plot, are those themes surrounding death. They tackle a good chunk of cruel motifs alongside hopeful ones, like the absence of love in life, the psychological impact of depression, and the futility of fighting. These are some heavy themes, and they're addressed in realistic reactions. They're not always handled in the most nuanced of ways, nor the cleverest, but they're humanized in ways that make them understandably jarring to confront, and it's that tipping of the audience's attention to such humane themes that keeps it interesting. Death Parade is a textbook example in how to approach themes, with its characters, animation, setup, and even its roundabout ways of throwing curveballs at the audience to keep them on their media literacy toes. It commits to telling the stories of the dead that some may not want to hear through means that some may want to witness. In taking the audience for a ride, it's one of those shows that may not break the top 10, 20, or even 50 in people's lists, but it is one that may stick with them longer than they'd expect, and for the right reasons. Hopefully. it's cunning, it's emotional, it's lively, it's deadening. It's the party of the afterlife, and a parade that you'll be glad, then scared, then sad you put your hands up for.